Welcome to the Prospective Doctor podcast, brought to you by Med School Coach. Each week we cover topics related to the pre-med journey to medical school and beyond, from the MCAT to completing your application and from starting medical school to choosing a specialty. Our podcast will provide essential information for anyone contemplating a career in medicine.
Hey everyone, it's Dr. Marinelli here. Thanks for joining us. Today I have a couple special guests on. I have Dr. Joel Ramirez, who's our Director of USMLE Tutoring, and I have Dan from Future MD Life on Instagram. We've had Dan on before and we've had Joel on before, but today we wanted to bring them both together and talk about USMLE Step 1. So Dan just took his USMLE Step 1, so congratulations for getting that done. Dan, how are you feeling now?
It's a lot better now that it's over.
Yeah, absolutely. So for today's episode, I kind of wanted to focus on your individual preparation and kind of giving people out there an idea how everybody's studying is different, but let's just talk about how you prepared. And we can kind of have Joel talk too about, how he recommends other people prepare and how these dance strategies can really be something that anybody can apply. So Dan, you want to kind of start off by telling us a little bit about your preparation?
Sure. So, hi guys, I'm Dan. I'm currently a third-year medical student, but a few months ago, I took my USMLE Step 1 exam. And it's something that was probably something I feared for like 2 years in medical school, like the big day of having to take this exam, which counts for so much. And I tried to start preparing as early as I could. And that meant like towards the beginning of my second year in medical school, I started thinking about how I could use my time to get a head start on the studying. So we began second year with the classic medical school courses like neurology, like the neuroscience, and then we went down and did systems. So after we did each block, I would start studying that information that would help me for USMLE Step 1. What that meant was, as we did neuroscience, I would read the first aid chapter of neuroscience. And these are long chapters. They do take time. I'd read the pathoma chapter, which is a book that has a lot of pathology information. I'd read that chapter and start getting accustomed to board resources so I didn't have to wait until the very end to get used to studying for Step 1.
Mm-hmm. Joel, is something like that a typical thing that you recommend for people that are maybe just, kind of getting into USMLE preparation or starting to prepare for it?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And thanks for having me on. Super excited for this. It seems to be very variable per person. I think some people really like to get started early on. Some people will talk about, annotating first aid and using resources early on. I don't think it's necessarily for everybody. I think for some people it can be a little daunting and not very useful because a lot of the things you're seeing you haven't learned before, and
Sure.
There's no way that you would actually know them, and for you to think that you'll actually understand it by the time you get to your specific exam is probably not realistic. I think what is really useful though is kind of like what Dan mentioned, familiarity. So getting an understanding of what these resources even are. For example, the classic one is, Sketchy Micro. I think a lot of people use that for microbiology during their coursework and also for Step 1. So that's one of the resources that very much makes sense to get familiar with during your preclinical years and then also used for the STEP exams as well.
Mm-hmm. Great. So Dan, that kind of sounds like, as you, are going through second year, that was kind of the approach that you took. Did you, after you were done with your classes, did you have some exclusive study time?
Yes. So the way our school does it is they give us between 6 and 8 weeks after the end of second year, like our last exam, until the start of training for our third year. So any time within that period, you can take Step 1. Some people actually take it like earlier on, maybe after like 5 weeks. Other people take 7 or 8, and some people even extend longer than that into their third year. It just depends on when everyone feels comfortable taking it. It's one of those exams where you can only take it once. I mean, unless you fail. Like if you pass, that's your score forever.
Right.
So you don't want to take it too soon. You have to be prepared when you take it. So if there's like a need to extend it, people do that. But yeah, luckily our school gave us, on average, most people take about 6 weeks to prepare. It's called dedicated when all you do is study for step 1. There's no outside schoolwork. There's nothing else you're responsible for. It's just sit and grind and get down the information that you need to know for this test.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I remember, I mean, it's been a little while since I took step 1, but I remember our school had something similar at that point. This question's both of you. When you were studying and you kind of sat down for that exclusive study time, you have a target score in mind and then constructed your study schedule around that? Or did you just construct a study schedule, and just hope for the best for the score?
I mean, that's a really good question. I guess I'd say I had a target score, but I knew that I'd have this amount of time and I would study fully for those 6 weeks and I would do as best as I could. I didn't want to extend or anything like that. I just felt whatever I can get done in those 6 weeks, that's my level of preparation, and I'll just take it then. And yeah, I mean, as you go along, you kind of get an idea of where your scores are ranging. So I guess a little bit of both.
Sure. How about you, Joel?
Yeah, so I think that's probably the most important first question when you're thinking about preparing for the exam and you're making a study plan, because I think you really need to be honest with yourself and reflect on how well have you been doing in medical school, how good are you at taking standardized tests, the SAT, ACT, MCAT, and then what do you want to do? And I think whether it's fair or not, the step 1 really kind of dictates what you can and can't do. So if you went to medical school to become a neurosurgeon or an orthopedic surgeon or a dermatologist, then the reality is that the average scores of students who match those specialties is much, much higher than other specialties. And so if you know that is your goal in life and why you went to medical school, then you really need to take step 1 really seriously. And if you haven't been doing well in medical school or you're not a great standardized test taker, then you need to be thinking of a very long-term plan. So not just, spending 6 to 8 weeks of dedicated studying, but spend time, at least studying part-time for a month or 2 as your second year is finishing, and then, the rest of your time spending it full-time. But I think that's kind of really key in determining what your goals are. Are you just trying to pass? Are you trying to get 215 and 220, move on with your life? Because then I think in that case, 6 to 8 weeks of dedicated studying is usually sufficient.
Right. So Dan, all right, going back to you. So you kind of knew your timeline. You had been studying during second year. Now you're to your exclusive study time. Can you give us an overview of what that looked like?
Yeah, sure. It was honestly probably the most intense, I'd probably say, regimented time of my life. I kind of created a schedule for myself and I tried to stick with it. So for the first 3 weeks, I even decided to exercise to keep my sanity. So I'd wake up around 6 or 7 in the morning, depending on the day. 6 if I was going to exercise, 7 if not. And I would start studying every day by 8. I decided to study at school. There's this kind of library area. I actually posted about it. It's called The Plains, where it's just this long hallway of desks. And I had this one desk that I would go to every day. And I had everything there. I had all my books. And from 8 until usually, I'd probably say 10 at night, sometimes 11, sometimes 9, really depending on the day. I would just sit at that desk and study and take a few breaks throughout the day for a little bit.
Wow.
And that day usually looked the same. It looked pretty similar, actually, I'd say, for most days. I got there and I would do a block of UWorld questions. A block is 40 questions. I did an hour time, so I got 40 questions done. And then I reviewed that. And that, for me, it took actually a lot longer, I'd say, than for a lot of people. But it was a total of 4 hours.
Mm-hmm.
I would go through every question and just read the explanations. That just all kind of takes time.
Yep.
In that process, you're learning, if I got the question wrong, especially, I'd spend a little bit more time trying to understand what it was saying.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, I would spend some time doing Anki cards, which are flashcards. And I did those for pre-made sketchy decks. So I don't know, we mentioned this a little earlier, but Sketchy it's this awesome resource that a lot of students use, especially for microbiology and for pharm, for all the medications that we had to learn. And I just figured a lot of students use it, and it actually worked pretty well for me to help me learn all the drugs and all the bacteria and viruses and everything.
Mm-hmm.
So that took a few hours at least. And then depending on whatever day it was, I'd learn a system. Like I'd focus on like one day doing cardiology. And that could take me, I had planned this all in advance, but that could take me like 2 or 3 days to get all of cardiology done.
Mm-hmm.
So what that meant for me was to read that chapter of first aid. And, that could take any amount of time, usually probably like 4 hours I would dedicate just to that. And I wouldn't always finish. So like it would have to take like 2 days maybe, right?
Mm-hmm.
After I read that, I would try to read some pathoma for that chapter, right? So the cardiology section of pathoma to learn the pathology too. And then depending on the day, I would try to do a little bit of more Anki flashcards for whatever I was doing. And then another block of UWorld, which took about 4 hours.
Mm-hmm.
So that was like pretty much consistently 7 days a week. That's what it looked like. I mean, every day was slightly different. Sometimes I would spend a little bit more time on UWorld or Anki if I had to like catch up. But for the most part, I was doing a lot of questions. I was doing review of content from first aid, pathoma, watching boards and beyond, things like that. And then doing the flashcards and more questions.
Wow. Joel, what are your thoughts on Dan's plan there?
Yeah, so I think the most important thing to kind of touch on at the beginning is that it's an extraordinarily intense and focused part of medical school. I always tell people that step one is the hardest part of medical school. I mean, I definitely feel that way. I think that medical school is challenging in other ways. The first 2 years are kind of challenging because you're transitioning to medical school and it's different. And third year is challenging because it's just awkward and everything's new. And then fourth year is challenging because you're doing sub-internships, you're working really hard, and you're preparing for residency. But I still don't think that anything is quite as challenging as preparing for step one.
Sure.
I think that everyone's study plan is going to look a little different because everyone's a different learner. Everyone has a different style. What I think is consistent across most people who are successful is they're studying for 12 to 16 hours a day, 6 to 7 days a week when they're studying. Mm-hmm. And when they're studying, they're working very hard. And a lot of it is kind of like what Dan had mentioned, kind of like a multimodal approach. So, doing some sort of combination of content review with doing practice questions, with doing there always needs to be some sort of mechanism for you to work on memorizing the details. Because I think that a lot of things that are tested on step one are not things that you just learn or things that make sense or things that are theoretical or conceptual. A lot of it, probably 20 to 30% of it, is just pure straight memorization. Like what chromosome is this gene on? Like they will literally ask you that, and there's really no understanding that. There's no theory behind that. It's just memorization. And really, it's pretty clear how to memorize, and how to memorize, studies have shown that the spaced repetition is how you memorize. So, I used Anki. I think that Anki is a really great tool because it kind of forces you to do that. Some people are not flashcard people. And so if you're not a flashcard person, then you need to kind of think about other creative ways to do it. But you need to be spending every day, a few hours every day, just working on memorizing and keeping the content in your brain.
Mm-hmm. Wow. That sounds like a couple just very, very grueling 2 months. Dan, how did you keep yourself disciplined? As I was saying, for 2 years had this knowledge that step one would be so important, and it's literally like the thing that makes or breaks people's residency application. So I knew that I had to do this. Like there was no escaping it. Things were coming. I had the date scheduled, and I also booked a vacation for after it, so I knew I wasn't changing it. So I said, I have to get everything I need done by that date. And because of that, in advance, I was able to create a schedule of what I would do daily, like a rough schedule. Like these days I would do neuro, this day I would do pulmonology, this day I would do renal. And I had to stick to that. Otherwise I'd fall behind. So if I didn't do something, if I skipped something or took time off, I wouldn't have got everything done and I wouldn't be prepared for the exam. Mm-hmm. So that's what kind of kept me going. And that's what caused some late nights, because I knew hey, I have to finish this material by the end of the night. If I don't, then it's going to mess up the rest of my schedule. So that's what kept me disciplined. I knew I had to get it done. And what about, did you take a prep course at all?
So I did not take a prep course, but luckily, I think it's super important to have somebody who is a mentor or a guide in this process. At my school, I was fortunate enough to have that. We have a department called like cognitive skills, where there's a person who literally advises, well, a few people actually, who literally advise like on the best resources to use, how to create a study schedule. And I spent hours with this person in advance and even a few times during dedicated, mapping everything out, thinking of how can I improve this, going over some questions and seeing what I did right or wrong and understanding something. Mm-hmm. I think it's super important to have somebody you can go to who has that knowledge, because otherwise it's like, you don't know how to improve. I wouldn't have known how to map out the schedule. I wouldn't have known how to set up my days without somebody giving me that advice.
Right. Joel, how do, for somebody that is considering like doing a prep course, how does that fit into, this kind of schedule that Dan's describing?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think that it really depends on what kind of learner you are. So some people are very independent learners. Some people are group learners. Some people like videos. Some people like reading. And so I think it's really important. And I think it's important to kind of understand how you learn. And for most people, it's by the time they get to step one, they know this. And then, if you don't, or if you don't feel confident about this, then it might take some critical reflection on thinking about, what worked for you in college, what worked for you in medical school, and how do you learn. I think prep courses can play a role. I think they can play a role for people who have challenges staying dedicated or challenges to staying disciplined and creating their own study plans. So a lot of the prep courses will kind of work to keep you on track. So I think they're valuable in that sense. But, I think in reality, a lot of studying for step one is going to be independent, no matter what. I mean, even if you do a prep course and you're meeting a few hours every day, you're still going home and studying on your own. And the majority of time that you spend, you're still doing it on your own. I mean, I always say the same thing about tutoring too with med school coach. The very small portion of your time will be spent actually with your tutor. Right. So I think it's really important to get guidance, whether that is from med school coach tutor, from your peers, from a guidance counselor, or somebody at your medical school, to make sure that the time you're spending on your own is going to be efficient and high yield. You're not kind of spinning your wheels on your own. And so I think that all the tutoring and prep courses can be useful adjuncts, but I think in reality, you're still going to be on your own, kind of having to grind it out and study on your own.
Yeah, absolutely. So Dan, when did you take your exam?
I took it in early June. And when we sign up, you get like a 3-month block. Like you can kind of say, I want to sign up for this 3-month period. And you can then schedule your exam at any of the available dates around you within that 3-month period. Mm-hmm. And the earlier you sign up, the better. Like I took it in early June, but I was signing up in December and January. That whole process was going on then. So it's super important to register as early as you can, because the test dates fill up and it's better to go somewhere that's nearby, like to a center that's close to you, rather than having to go pretty far. Like some people have to fly to their test centers because if they wait too long, they're all just booked up. Well,
do you feel like, and we definitely don't need to talk numbers here, but do you feel like all your studying and your dedication and, this model that we kind of just talked about, how you coordinated your studying, do you feel like it paid off with your score?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like I did absolutely everything I could, and I'm really happy with how it turned out.
Good.
Obviously, there are things that now looking back, I see like I wish I had done this in preparation, things like that. But yeah, I'm really happy with the work I put in, and I think that it was super important to just be dedicated for that 6-week period of time, and even before that.
Mm-hmm. Well, awesome. Congratulations on being done. I know that's probably just such a weight off your chest, and just feels so good to be back to reality again. Joel and Dan, thanks so much for joining me today. This has been super helpful. Join us again, everybody, for more talks about USMLE Step 1 with Dan and Joel, which are just awesome resources. Thanks, guys, for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for having me, Dr. Marinella.
Our mission is to inspire, encourage, and inform students as you journey through a rigorous and intricate process of achieving your dreams in medicine. Visit us at prospectivedoctor.com and medschoolcoach.com for more essential resources in your medical school journey and beyond.